We've heard speeches on this floor, Mr. Speaker, about fairness, about treating them the same. And I'll remind members that on June 25th, 1998, the IRS Restructuring and Reform Act, of which Mr. Hoyer, Mr. Cummings, and others voted in favor for, gave this same power and authority to the IRS. Gave them the same authority and power. Why not treat them equally and fairly? Why not treat them exactly the same as the IRS employees? Why are the IRS employees treated so unfairly? Other members that are standing here on this floor today voted in favor of that bill. So it was okay back then. Just gave it to them. And guess what? Tax compliance went up. I take issue with this, quote, ideology rather than facts. The facts are every single year, the number of federal employees paying their federal taxes has not paying their federal tax, gone up. In fact, from 2008, we roughly didn't collect $962 million. This year, or 2014, $1.14 billion. If you pay your taxes, you're trying to pay your taxes, you don't have a problem. But if you want to be fair, if you want to be the same, if you want to treat them equally, then give the other departments and agencies the same power that we gave the IRS. Absolutely.
What other employee in America is subject to being fired because they don't pay taxes? And does the gentleman want to include either members of Congress in this bill or all private sector employees? And I yield to my friend for an answer to that question.
And thank you. And I appreciate the spirits in which that's act. I would hope the gentleman would join me in co-sponsoring H.R. 1564, the Members of Congress Tax Accountability Act. There are constitutional reasons why we can't include them in this provision, but this bill has been referred to the Committee on House Administration, and I would encourage all members to get behind this because there should be a higher standard for members of Congress. That should be more readily available to the public. You should have to disclose that liability. Right now you don't. And so I introduced that bill as well. I would also argue that federal employees taking taxpayer dollars have a high standard. And that the evidence that we have, and I've said it repeatedly, and I know the gentleman's heard this, but, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Hoyer voted in favor of this same bill years ago, and it's worked. And I've never heard anybody say, this is a problem. We got to change this. We got to take it out. I've never heard anybody offer an amendment. In fact, we 100%, every amendment that was offered by the Democrats. We accepted them. We expected them. And so I want to tackle a couple other things.
I don't think I got the answer to the private sector employees.
Fair enough. Reclaiming my time, since I didn't yield it, but reclaiming my time. I said clearly I don't think this should be part of the private sector. I think working for the federal government is a privilege. It is an honor. And I take great exception, Mr. Speaker, to the idea and the notion that we treat federal workers so poorly that if we were a company, everybody would quit. Well, they can quit. They don't. You look at the turnover rate in the private sector versus the turnover rate in the federal government, we treat them pretty darn well. Can we do things better? Yes. And part of that is weeding out the bad apples. If you're sitting there watching pornography on your computer 4 hours a day, you should be fired. If you're a DEA agent down serving in Colombia and you have sex slaves coming before you paid by those, then you should fire them. And if you're a federal worker thumbing your nose at the federal government, not paying your taxes, then you should be eligible to be fired by the supervisor. That supervisor, don't we trust them to make that decision and say, you know what, this person is so vital, they do such good work, we're going to keep them. But you know what? 24,833 federal employees didn't even file a federal tax return. Didn't even file one last year. Is that a too small a percentage to worry about? How do you look people in the eye who are all working in this room and in some government office, and they're all paying their taxes, but these 8 yahoos over here aren't paying their taxes? I believe that standing up for the federal workers means, you know what? We owe it to all of you that are doing a good job to make sure that they are too. And if they don't, and they're not getting good, guess what? A, you're not going to be hired, and B, you're eligible to be fired. It's exactly what Mr. Hoyer, Mr. Speaker, voted for, and it worked. It worked. It was a good piece of legislation. It was a good vote. And guess what? The IRS now has the highest, less than 1% of their people don't pay their federal taxes. Give that same tool to the other department and agencies, and I think we'll have great, even better compliance, and we can look the American people in the eye and say, you know what, we're doing everything we can. Stop picking on federal employees. Without a